The San Francisco 49ers and Dallas Cowboys may already be looking at season-defining games. We got all that and much more on today's episode of Locked On NFL.
The barbershop is open and Tony Wiggins has a chair for you. He's ready with some real NFL talk. The local experts of Locked On bring their expertise, and Wiggy is ready with his clippers and shears. Sit down and enjoy. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's going on, football fans, and welcome into another episode of Locked On NFL. You have stepped into the barber shop with the bald barber, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on your favorite social media, standing in today for our good friend Tony Wiggins, who's dealing with some stuff, technical stuff, everything like that. He'll be back up and running next week. So for right now, I'll be pioneering here at the barbershop. And in the barber chair today is Matt Williamson, former NFL scout at Williamson NFL. Matt, you walk into a barbershop, you see a bald barber. Do you stay or do you go? What do you do?
I don't get there nearly enough. I'm cool with it. I mean, you're looking sharp. The beard's groomed well. I trust you. Go to town, man.
There you go. There you go. Absolutely. We'll call it the bald bearded barber today. We appreciate you very much for being here. We're going to run through every single game of the NFL slate. No bye weeks, no days off for us here at Locked On. We're going to run through each of those. We'll take a look at Jameis Winston's potential rebrand with the Cleveland Browns. We'll dive into the Indianapolis Colts, so they continue to roll with Anthony Richardson. I'll tell you why I think that they should. We'll get Matt Williamson's thoughts as well. And we're going to take a look here to open up the show with some must-win matchups across the NFC. We appreciate you very much for making us your first listen and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by friends over at Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app. Use the promo code Locked On NFL for $50 off of to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. Matt, when it comes down to the San Francisco 49ers and Dallas Cowboys, first of all, it feels like there's no better, more historied matchup than those two teams. It doesn't get more football than those two teams. But looking at this weekend's game, it feels like this almost feels like a must-win for each of these teams if they want to keep their seasons alive.
Yeah, 100%. And I don't think either season has gone as planned, or expected. And I do think, Super Bowl hangovers are a real thing. I mean, and a lot of the Niners were looking for contracts, and it's been kind of an odd offseason. Ayuk and McCaffrey gets hurt before you know it. And it puts a lot of stress on Purdy. It puts a lot of stress on a defense that I don't think is quite at their standards to where they've been, especially in the defensive line. They usually go like 8 deep with star players, and now it's just not that hockey line type of mentality. I also think losing Dan Quinn has not done the Cowboys a lot of favors. They don't stop the run well. They don't run well. And Dak is always so good with the football, but he's putting the ball in harm's way too much, and people are neutralizing CeeDee Lamb to some effect. So I think both these teams have issues, to be honest with you. I like where the Niners sit in this game, though, because I don't think either one of their tackles can handle Bosa. And I think Shanahan realizes maybe I should just get back to the drawing board and run the football. And I think that they'll have success with that.
Yeah, this feels like very much a game of keep away between these two, because you're not going to have the weapons that you're accustomed to having. No Micah Parsons expected in this game as he continues to deal with his injury. No Brandon Ayuk, who's done for the season. Debo Samuel just had pneumonia. The Cowboys kicker is doing jury duty throughout the week. I mean, there's just every storyline you can imagine throughout. But the one player, as you mentioned, Matt, that our good friends, Brian Peacock over at Locked On 49ers and Marcus Mosher over at Locked On Cowboys keeping an eye out on is Nick Bosa.
Nick Bosa has to take control. Nick Bosa and the 49ers front have to eat in this game. So I'm going to point that out as matchup number one for the San Francisco 49ers. The all-pros that are actually on the field need to play like all-pros in this one. And you're at home. This is a game where you're favored. Go win. Go beat up on those matchups.
Yeah, the Cowboys the last couple of weeks have played some really good left defensive ends, whether it's Brian Burns, TJ Watt, and then Aiden Hutchinson. And they've not handled those guys particularly well. Now, I don't know if the 49ers are going to have the guys on the other side that are going to make the Cowboys nervous, and maybe that opens up more opportunities to chip and to double Nick Bosa. I think it also helps that Javon Hargrave, who we didn't even mention when it comes to injuries, he's obviously out for this game. He's on the injured reserve list. Do the 49ers, Brian, have the other edge rushers in this game or the other pass rushers that can win one-on-one matchups? Or is this going to be a game where if it's not Nick Bosa getting pressure, nobody's getting pressure?
Pressure going to be the big category in this one, but I'll tell you what, I think the other big category.
I host a podcast with both those dudes. That was kind of
those guys.
See those two talking to each other. I'm used to talking to them.
I know, right? It's a very, very different situation for you there. I agree that pressure is going to be big in this one, but I think the run game is going to be even bigger in this one as well, Matt. I think that's going to be a big factor in this game. And if I have to choose between Kyle Shanahan or Mike McCarthy there, I'm going Kyle Shanahan. I think the 49ers walk away with this one. How do you see this game going?
I'm in the same boat. I think McCarthy gets a little bit of a bum rap in terms of coaching reputation, but I still think this favors Shanahan greatly. I think he has better horses. I think he has a better run game, which is really important. And that edge rusher to me, and we haven't even mentioned Fred Warner or somebody like that too that causes problems. I mean, I know the Niners are down on star power, but they had some extra to give.
Yeah, absolutely. Enough disruption over there in San Francisco to go around. I think you're seeing enough disruption going on as well with the Atlanta Falcons over in the NFC South. I want to turn the page over to them and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers because it feels like whoever wins this game is going to be in control of that NFC South division. Let's go to Locked On Falcons host Aaron Freeman because he thinks that a big piece of this game is going to come down to how Tampa Bay changes its identity thanks to the loss of wide receivers Chris Godwin and Mike Evans.
With the Bucs being down Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, it feels like this is going to be a game where the Bucs are going to try to shift their identities away from passing the football to running the football. And the thing that stood out to me is, hey, the Bucs ran for 125 yards against the Baltimore Ravens last week, showing that they somewhat were successfully able to shift that identity. And that's notable because the Baltimore Ravens are the best run defense in the NFL, and the Bucs managed to run for over 100 yards, and they're facing the Falcons run defense that is not the best run defense in the NFL. It's very far from the best run defense in the NFL. So I sit there and I say, if they could have that success on the ground last week, you know, what are they going to do to the Atlanta Falcons, and can the Falcons run defense step up really for the first time this year on Sunday?
Just want to mention real quick that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers also ran for 225 yards on the New Orleans Saints the week right before that. So they have been finding some success on the ground. Does this one feel like whoever wins here kind of gets early control and might win the division? Like, does it feel like that kind of a matchup to you, Matt?
It does. And I think the Bucs, well, I don't know if Cooper Kupp's still available after last night's win, but I would think they're kicking the tires on some receiver help too. And if they could get through this week by running the football and playing a little bit better defense and Mayfield being a little more even. I mean, he's had a really good year, but this past week was the bad Baker again. You know, I mean, he gets a little over his skis at times. The one thing I wanted to add, I thought what Aaron said there was really, really good, but I think the Bucs offensive line might be the most improved line in the league. You know, getting Graham Barton and Wirfs is a stud, and they're being a really physical at the point of attack, and I'm not real impressed with Atlanta's front. So that might be enough to squeak out a win and, you know, overcome those receiver injuries. I think I'm going to take the Bucs in this game.
Yeah, I kind of like the Bucs in a real gritty type of victory. I get it's Kirktober and all those other things, but I think we're getting too close to Bake-Vember here, and so I'm going to go with the with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on that one. Coming up next, we're going to dive into a look at the Indianapolis Colts, who are fighting for the top of their division as well. They're in position to win the AFC South, but which quarterback leads them there is going to be the hotly contested debate. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with The Barbershop, today's episode of Locked On NFL, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On NFL brought to you by friends over at Prize Picks, the easiest and most fun way to play daily fantasy sports. It's not you versus a bunch of mystery lineups trying to win a small slice to some big pie that you don't understand. No, you're not going up against all the spreadsheet wizards, people with too much time on their hands. It's you versus the house. It's you versus Prize Picks projections, and it's that simple. They might give you a projection like Patrick Mahomes, 267 and a half passing yards, for instance. You turn around, you pick more or less. You do that for 2 to 6 players. Get it right for 4 players. You can win up to 100 times your entry back by using Prize Picks. Doesn't get any better or more fun than that. So go and check them out today. Download the Prize Picks app and use that promo code LOCKEDONNFL so you get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup as a new customer with that promo code LOCKEDONNFL. Prize Picks, run your game. Today's episode also brought to you by friends over at Zbiotics, who have created a pre-alcohol probiotic drink. The pre-alcohol probiotic drink by Zbiotics is the world's first genetically engineered prebiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists who were looking to tackle those rough mornings after drinking. You know, it's hard to get a PhD. Sometimes you get a little bit of experience in this kind of stuff. So here's how it works. When you drink alcohol, it gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's that byproduct, not dehydration, that causes those rough days the next day. So pre-alcohol induces and produces an enzyme to break that byproduct down. Just remember to make Zbiotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly and then feel better tomorrow. Go to zbiotics.com/LockedOnNFL to learn more and get 15% off of your first order when you use code LockedOnNFL at checkout. Zbiotics is backed by a 100% money back guarantee. So if you're not satisfied for any reason, they'll refund you your money, no questions asked. Remember to go to zbiotics.com/LockedOnNFL and use that promo code LockedOnNFL at checkout for 15% off. All right, everybody, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On NFL. We broke down a couple of must-win matchups. Now, I want to look at some must-prove quarterbacks, Matt. One of the big conversations this offseason was all around the Indianapolis Colts and Anthony Richardson and how good he was going to be moving into his next season. Well, now there's conversation that maybe Joe Flacco should be the guy that leads this Indianapolis Colts team. But here they are at 4-3 and in striking distance when it comes to the AFC division or the AFC South division. Before we give our thoughts, let's go to Zach Hicks as well as John Hickman over at Locked On Colts and Locked On Texans during their crossover, who were discussing this very quarterback situation.
Really, for the Colts, man, it's about stringing together some success rate on offense and make this a game where, you actually possess the football. We saw back in week 1 when the Colts came kind of close in that game, but we saw in week 1, the Colts offense was so feast or famine. And at the end of the day, they weren't able to keep up with the rushing attack. And then obviously the big plays by CJ Stroud. So for the Colts, man, it's about actually holding on to the football, putting together some drives, and it starts with Anthony Richardson.
The offense looks totally different when Joe Flacco was out on that field.
Yeah,
guys are able to do more feasting than famining, right? They ain't got to pray to some, gold staff god for rain to come out when Joe Flacco's out there. When it's Anthony Richardson, they in the desert starving. That brother is starving. So is it like, you know what? We gotta give him that time to get through these rep patches so he can be that. He was compared to, for a lot of people, Cam Newton, so he can be that type of player. Still raw, still young. He needs time.
As the former NFL scout, Matt, how patient are you willing to be? And I know it's a different conversation in today's NFL too, right? Like we're becoming increasingly impatient at the quarterback position. But how patient are you willing to be with a player that has the raw talent of an Anthony Richardson?
Well, I think we all agree Flacco gives them a better chance to win. Guys like Downs are so much more productive. Pittman's so much more productive. I do think it's noteworthy for this game. I know it's not what you asked, but it looks like Buckner on defense and Taylor, the running back, are back for this one, Jonathan Taylor. So they're getting some reinforcements, which is huge, and they're great players. But this goes back to, like my scouting background. When you're there in draft meetings and you're talking about Richardson, if he's on the board with the 5th overall pick or whatever, are we going to pull the trigger? Yes, we've decided that. That was what, a year and a half ago or whatever, that those meetings took place. Well, if we do that, then what's part 2 of that discussion? Well, Anthony hasn't hardly played at Florida. Well, we're gonna have to live with some growing pains. Well, when those growing pains come, don't be shocked. You know what I mean? Right. Like we knew what you were getting into. This guy needs every in-game rep he could possibly get. And frankly, who he reminds me is of a young Josh Allen. Like I didn't like
Yeah.
Josh Allen coming out of Wyoming because I didn't think he was nearly accurate enough. And then he gets to the pros, first year, couldn't complete passes. And then studies and works on it. And I was in the league 20 years ago. And back then, no one's like, oh, he'll get more accurate at the NFL. But people thought you were crazy if you thought like that. But now with all these individual quarterback coaches and biomechanics and things I don't understand away from the facility, these guys are getting more accurate. So he has to play. This is the decision you made way back when, and he's nowhere to go but up. I mean, it's hard right now. Don't get me wrong, but I would rely on his legs a little bit more. I know I'm rambling on, but the problem is, you can't rely on his legs enough because he can't finish games. I mean, his rookie year.
Yeah, it's the durability, right?
Right. If I knew he could take the pounding and win games with him as a runner while he develops as a passer, great. But I can't get this guy hurt again. I'm sure ownership over the offseason was like, all right, could you stop running our prize guy? Because every game he plays, he doesn't finish,
Yeah, absolutely. That's the extra pressure that I think is kind of away from the public eye, right? But I do think indeed that giving Anthony Richardson all of the time that he needs is important. I was coming from the same perspective as you did. You know what you signed up for here.
Yeah.
So go out there and finish what you started in terms of what that project or what that product can be. And boy, if you get it right with a guy like Anthony Richardson and that's tool set, like that's worth every bit of it. But here they are at 4-3, going up against the 5-2 Houston Texans. Do you think Anthony Richardson could potentially bring him home on this one?
It'd be a huge game, and it would really shake things up in the South. But I am taking the Texans.
Yeah.
Little something's off with Houston, though. I mean, their line is not living up to their pedigree. They only run the ball well when Mixon's in the game. A lot of penalties, and people are blaming Stroud. I think that's totally unfair. But they also lost one of the best receivers in the league. People don't look at Nico Collins that way. I'm not sure anyone was having a better year when he left. But I still think they win this game.
Yeah, I'll go with you on that one too. I just want to see them develop a counterpunch. That's the big thing for me with Houston is kind of like when that run game goes away and they can't figure out kind of how they want to operate their offense, they got to find a way to just be able to rely on the drop back passing game. And if they can get that done and they can find a way to scheme that up, then I think they'll be in a much, much better position. Let's take a look now at another quarterback that's looking for a little bit of a redemption story. Somebody that I know very well. Former New Orleans Saints quarterback, former Tampa Bay Buccaneers quarterback, Jameis Winston is going to be the starter in Cleveland. Here's what Jeff Lloyd of Locked On Browns had to say about a little something extra that maybe Jameis might be able to provide, might actually have more to do with his limitations than anything else.
Jameis has got no intention of trying to run. Jameis Winston's legs have never, ever been the strength of his game. Just the one facet in being a great athlete, whether it was a baseball player, football player in Jameis Winston's past, he was never a guy who ran very well in this modern day age where all these quarterbacks are tremendous athletes. Jameis can take a beating. He's always been able to take a beating. He's a physically bigger guy than Deshaun Watson, a little bit taller, much thicker. Jameis, and I think the city's kind of fallen in love with Jameis a little bit. His comments last Sunday notwithstanding, got a personality. He is definitely a leader. He was a leader in Tampa. He was a leader in New Orleans when he was never even considered to be the starting quarterback. He started, but was never the starter in New Orleans. Jameis talks, people listen.
I will say, just for clarification, Jameis did win the quarterback competition here in New Orleans against Taysom Hill 2021. He was Sean Payton's starting quarterback in a 5-2 start. So he did actually earn a starting role here in New Orleans. He just didn't get the opportunity to keep it through injuries and some bad decision-making by the New Orleans Saints organization after that when it came to him versus Andy Dalton and all these other things. But I do think Jeff's
Ross,
right.
Super quick question for you, because we haven't seen him in a while, and you're closer to it than I am. He was not a turnover machine last time we saw him, correct?
Not as much. He still had that.
He's growing up. Yeah.
Yeah. He still had that propensity, of course, but that's what happens when the further that you throw the ball down the field, Matt, as you know, your percentage for turnover opportunities turns up. And what he does very well is throws the ball down the field. So you're certainly going to see a little bit of that propensity, but he was not the same guy that he was on a 30 for 30 season, with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for sure. He's gotten much better at kind of taking what a defense gives you. We'll see if he can carry that along because he'll need it up against the Baltimore Ravens this weekend, which is, I think, still one of the best modern day rivalries with all the history that it has and one of the better rivalries that we see in the league. How do you see this one shaking out? And can Jameis potentially rebrand himself here in Cleveland?
I absolutely think yes on the second question. I am a Jameis fan for a lot of the reasons Jeff mentioned. I mean, his teammates adore him. He is unbelievably competitive, very talented, runner aside. I mean, he's an old school pocket passer. I mean, there's no question about that. But of all the guys that age that have, quote, busted, he's my bet to be the next Sam Darnold, Geno Smith. You know what I mean? Like, I think he could maybe be an opening day starter next year. Like, I think I'm still a believer in him. I've given up on Mariota and Trubisky and some of those guys. But my problem with this situation, though, is they're playing the Ravens this week. Like, I think the Browns could be reinvigorated. Nick Chubb's back, his second game, knocked off some rust. We can hand the ball to a running back and do what the Browns did for the last couple of years. But I just wonder about the 50-minute mark of that game. Does that luster kind of wear off and be like, we still aren't winning any games this year. Tackling Derrick Henry's getting really old. Chasing Lamar around this field's getting really old. And then the Ravens just step on your throat, you know?
Yeah. I completely agree. I think the Ravens' run game is the thing that actually dominates this game. But I do think Jameis has a really good opportunity here filling in for Cleveland, even if that doesn't get started this week. All right, coming up next, let's get a thought on every single remaining game for the rest of the weekend. And we'll also take a look at the Philadelphia Eagles and their revitalization on offense. We got that coming up for you next on Locked On NFL, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On NFL brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, the only place that you should be going when it comes to putting money down on your favorite games and making the game more interesting. For instance, this weekend, you've got some fantastic matchups. The New York Jets hosting or actually traveling to take on the New England Patriots. Can the combo of Aaron Rodgers, although he's dealing with all of his injuries right now, but Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams, the reunion, can they get things going this week in a way that they couldn't last week? 7-point favorites up against the New England Patriots. Maybe you like that line to cover. Maybe you like the New England Patriots to keep it close, and maybe you like the New York Jets to still continue to stumble out of the gate on offense. Whatever you like, you can bet on it over at FanDuel today. And also over at FanDuel, if you get a hunch during the game, you want to check out the latest stats, live play-by-play, and so much more. You can find it all in the same page where you do place your bets. Just doesn't get any better than FanDuel. And especially right now, because as a new customer, you'll get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's your first $5 bet. $200 in bonus bets guaranteed coming your way. That's at FanDuel.com. All right, everybody, wrapping up the barbershop here. Matt Williamson, NFL scout, myself, Ross Jackson, host of Locked On Saints podcast. We're both your Locked On NFL experts. You can also find Matt over on the Locked On Dynasty Football podcast, as well as the Peacock and Williamson NFL show, one of the best NFL shows out there. Make sure you go and check out both of those shows as your second listen today after you're done here on Locked On NFL. Matt, let's start off with the Philadelphia Eagles here. They're going to be in a big matchup this weekend with the Cincinnati Bengals. Let's hear from Louis DiBiase because he's pretty stoked about what he's seeing from two big offensive contributors, wide receiver A.J. Brown and Saquon Barkley. There's just one element he'd like to see maybe introduced a little bit more by offensive coordinator Kellen Moore.
So obviously having Saquon Barkley and A.J. Brown on an offense, like it goes without saying what that combination can do to a defense. But I do think having those two players specifically together is such an advantage because of how well they complement each other. I think if you look back to A.J. Brown's time with the Tennessee Titans, obviously having an elite wide receiver one and an elite top running back, it helps any offense. It makes you pretty much not unstoppable, but you're going to score a ton of points every single game. However, A.J. Brown is such a good receiver over the middle of the field when it comes to run after the catch, crossers, play action type of routes that the Tennessee Titans utilize so well once they established Derrick Henry running it down your throat, that it was a perfect combination. And I really hope Kellen Moore sees that, sees what he has with Saquon Barkley right now, absolutely cooking, and kind of take a page out of the old Titans playbook and use A.J. Brown and Saquon in that way with more play action.
Boy, Barkley's been a lot of fun to watch over in Philly. That's been a great addition for them. How do you like the tandem of A.J. Brown, Saquon Barkley, and the Philadelphia Eagles against a 23rd ranked defense for the Cincinnati Bengals?
I can see a lot of points in this game. I mean, I think those potentially the two best wide receiver pairings in the league.
Yeah.
I don't love how either one of these defenses are playing. I haven't loved how Hurts is playing, but I do think they have more assets. And Barkley's probably the main one than the Bengals. I think Burrow's been the clearly better quarterback of the two.
Yeah.
But I think Lane Johnson coming back helps a lot. Kelsey's been missed. I think the Eagles handle the firepower better. Quinyon Mitchell's been a revelation at corner. So I think their corners can deal with the receivers of Cincy a little better than vice versa.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. It's been interesting watching the Bengals. It feels like Joe Burrow's playing great, but it's been the defense that has cost them some of those games. So we'll see how those matchups end up shaking out here in that game. All right, let's take a look at the rest of the NFL slate. 5 games we've already hit so far, Matt. 1 game already in the books, which we'll come back to. 10 games. Let's get it. Let's start with the Chicago Bears and Washington Commanders, 2 teams that I would not be thought I would be saying this about going into the season, but might be my favorite game that I'm looking forward to this weekend. The Bears right now favored -3 on the road against Washington, which we'll see what happens with Jaden Daniels in this situation, but might be a Marcus Mariota game.
It would have been really fun if we could have seen the 2 early picks square off.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but I don't think we're going to see it. I like the Bears in this game. I think their defense is the difference. I think their offense is coming around well. I mentioned Mariota before. He was fine last week, but he has a hard time completing passes the last couple of years too. So I like the Bears kind of in convincing fashion, and we might start questioning the Commanders a little even.
Yeah, it becomes very interesting there for sure. And then what does it say about Cliff Kingsbury if they end up winning, though? I don't know. It could be very interesting if they can keep that offense
Great
rolling,
story
right?
so far.
Yeah, great story. Either way you go on that one. All right, let's take a look at the Buffalo Bills, who are favored by 3 going and traveling to the Seattle Seahawks, facing the 12th man. Seattle's been an impressive team so far, but it still feels to me like this is a game that's in Buffalo's control.
It's a really tough road trip, though. I mean, Buffalo to Seattle, brutal place to play.
Right.
Seattle's got some momentum. I'm not counting on DK Metcalf, though. I could see a slow start from the Bills, but Allen's not turning the ball over. I think the Bills eventually get a tough, grinded out type of win.
Yeah, absolutely. We got a Kansas City Chiefs heavily favored in this game. Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs with their newly acquired piece in DeAndre Hopkins, wide receiver. 9.5-point favorites at the Las Vegas Raiders. I know division games are sometimes weird, but Matt, I'm not too worried about this one for Kansas City.
No, I'm not even sure if Hopkins is a factor. It doesn't even bother me.
Yeah,
I'm sure there'll be a lot of red in the stands in Vegas, and I think the Raiders are clearly one of the worst teams in the league.
Yeah. And I think we get the worst team against the best team. We'll see. One of the worst teams against one of the best teams. We'll see. I think that's exactly what we're going to see on the field on Sunday. How about the New York Jets favored by 7 points up against the New England Patriots? You think Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams can get on the same page this week?
Yeah, just because I think the Patriots have the worst offensive line in the league. I'm a May fan, but he's just swimming upstream right now, and their defense isn't helping. I don't like where the Jets are at, but I think they win. I'm not sure if it's if they cover, but I think they win.
Yeah, I'm picking against the New England Patriots for the rest of the season just because I don't like how much the punter licks his hands. Like, just stop. Do it once. I
gotta look. Okay.
So uncomfortable. I'll send it over to you. It's so uncomfortable. The Green Bay Packers on the road at Jacksonville Jaguars, a place where Aaron Rodgers used to struggle, but I'm not so sure about Jordan Love, though. 3.5-point favorites, though. So the home team getting a little bit of love here with Jacksonville returning to the States. How you see this one shaking out? Because I don't expect this one to go the Jaguars' way.
No, I don't love that they're returning to the States and don't have a bye. Especially after 2 whole weeks of being in London. I mean, all their bodies finally adjusted to that time, and now they're back in the States. And they also don't defend the pass very well, and I think Love is playing extremely well.
Yeah. Tennessee Titans major underdogs, 11.5 points, giving to the Detroit Lions. This feels like a runaway for the Lions.
Yeah, I feel that way as well. I don't know where the points come from Tennessee. It's a big number, but I think Detroit's right there with the Ravens as the top 2 teams in the league.
Yeah, I completely agree. Arizona Cardinals going on the road to the Miami Dolphins. Dolphins, we'll see what's going on with them, but they might have their old quarterback room back. Tua Tagovailoa practicing. Skylar Thompson looks to be back. All these other things. Is that going to be enough to help to charge the Miami Dolphins to maybe get a win up against what has been a maybe pesky, maybe better than expected Arizona Cardinals team?
I do think that description fits Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also expecting Tua, and I think it's that defense. Arizona just doesn't have quality players right now. I think Waddle and Tyreek and Chan all burst back to life. I like Miami to win this game.
Yeah. I'm looking at the Cardinals as kind of this year's Detroit Lions of a few years ago. Like they're just building and building and building. They're chopping wood, as they would say. Speaking of chopping wood, that's one of head coach Dennis Allen's favorite phrases over at the New Orleans Saints. They're underdogs, 7.5 points up against Los Angeles Chargers. How you see this one going?
I don't know if the Chargers should be that big of favorites over anyone, but I thought Herbert played really well last week. That Saints offense is so depleted. I guess I'll take the Chargers, but that seems like a lot of points.
Yeah, Chargers have not scored a touchdown in the past 15 possessions. I think the Saints defense is kind of on a kind of a downward, not a downward spiral, but they're not doing so hot right now. I don't know that the Chargers keep that streak going, and I don't know if the New Orleans Saints are going to be able to keep up. But getting healthier on their offensive side, but as I've noted before, it's going to take a lot more than just health to help the New Orleans Saints turn around a 5-game losing streak.
I wouldn't want your Saints' older defense to be on the field a long stretch against a good running game,
Yeah. And that is a team that is committed to its run game, that's for sure, when it comes to a Jim Harbaugh-led Los Angeles Chargers team. Denver Broncos at home, hosting the Carolina Panthers, 10.5-point favorite. Sean Payton knows the Carolina Panthers pretty well. The Carolina Panthers know that they're probably kind of down for the count for most of the season here.
We're going to get Bryce Young, probably for better or worse, but probably for worse. I think the number's too big, but I do think Denver wins. I think Denver's defense is really good. Their offensive line should control this game. Carolina's defense is real bad. I think I'm going to take Denver. I mean, I know that's a big number. I'm switching on that one. I just can't put any faith at all in the Panthers right now.
Yeah. Especially a Bryce Young led one. Andy Dalton, of course, dealing with the hand injury from a car accident in Charlotte. Kind of a crazy situation there. But so Bryce Young back out on the field against a very good Denver Broncos defense. We were talking about some of the worst teams in the NFL earlier, Matt. So I saved the worst for last. The New York Giants. 5.5-point underdogs going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers at Pittsburgh on Monday night. This feels like Pittsburgh's game.
It really does. I mean, Tomlin's record is unbelievable, especially at home on Monday night. I dug up this nugget. I mean, I have so many nuggets for Steelers, but primetime games, Russell Wilson's 33-17-1. Daniel Jones is 1-14.
Man.
I mean, Giants pass rush is really the only thing that scares me here against a pretty beat up Steelers line, but I think they just run and play defense, and tough place to play too. I'm going to take the Steelers.
Yeah. It feels like a logical way to go on this one. And then we had a great Thursday night football matchup. The Los Angeles Rams knocking off the Minnesota Vikings 30-20. The Vikings started off 5-0, now 2 straight losses. And boy, the Rams just looked like their old selves again, didn't they? It was a great Sean McVay game. Got Puka Nacua back, got Cooper Kupp back. Matt, my biggest takeaway from this one, Cooper Kupp's not going anywhere, and I doubt the Los Angeles Rams are going to be fire sailing anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, their division is now winnable. I mean, who knows if the Niners or Seattle wins this week. We've talked about those games. I do think getting both those receivers back is absolutely huge. Stafford's still a really good player. Kyron Williams is a force. I'm a little worried about Minnesota all of a sudden, though. I mean, you lose Christian Darrisaw. I mean, he's one of the absolute most important players on that team. And one note that I think is important, going forward, is the record of teams that play the Lions the week before is it's just like
wild.
It's like the Niners last year. They just beat you up in a short week. So all you bettors out there should take notice of that.
Yeah. That's one to keep in mind for the Dallas Cowboys game too. They lost to the Lions, had a bye week. Then they come back up against the San Francisco 49ers. So another one to keep an eye out on when it comes to sort of the Detroit Lions loss hangover, it seems, for NFL teams so far this season. Matt, this was excellent. There's your breakdown for all 16 games across the NFL this weekend, those past and those upcoming. For more, make sure you go and check out Peacock and Williamson, the NFL show that keeps you up to date every single Monday through Friday. Matt Williamson Brian Peacock, keeping you up to date with everything going on across the league there. We'll see you again here soon on Monday. It'll be Tyler and Gino to lead you off to get you caught up with all the big stories from this weekend of NFL action. Thank you very much for making us your first listen and for being an everydayer. For Matt Williamson, I'm Ross Jackson. Thank you very much for being here with us. We'll see you again here soon. Another time with the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.